Okay, continuing with the disco craze and the chart dominance of the Bee Gees, they were joined by two other acts really at the supremacy of the disco movement, Donna Summer and Chic. Let's take a look first at Donna Summer. She was a local gal for us, Boston, born and raised. And Donna Summer, as you heard in Love to Love You Baby earlier, she started her career as a disco queen sort of in 75. By 1978, she was at the top of her game. She was the biggest star in the business. 78, 79, Donna Summer was huge. And she released an album called Bad Girls, and it was extremely successful. The first single from the album was called Hot Stuff. And yeah, it was a number one disco hit. But what was even more important about Hot Stuff was it showed that disco and rock and roll were not maybe quite as far apart as people had always assumed, because it was the first time that sort of an electric guitar feel had come into a disco recording, and you could genuinely hear the rock and roll in the disco of Donna Summer's Hot Stuff. Hot Stuff, Donna Summer. Okay, Chic. The group Chic was led by the team of Bernard Edwards and Nile Rodgers. Edwards and Rodgers would go on to be great, great, and important producers throughout certainly the early 1980s. But as the two guys at the helm of Chic, they made some extraordinary music. Chic was very elegant, very stylized, and very layered in their approach. In fact, most of Chic's club tracks, and club tracks, by the way, were the extended versions of the songs on the radio. So you'd have a 3 or 4 minute song hit the radio. You would have a 10, 12, 20-minute version that would play in the clubs. And in Chic's club tracks, a lot of times you would hear the breakdown. So they would go and you would just hear the bass line for a bit. And then they would add the strings on top of it. And then they would add the keyboards on top of that. And then add the percussion. And then add the vocals or something to that effect. It sort of dissected the energy of this thing and showed us how the pieces work together. But B, it also, when you did it like that, it turned a 30-second segment into a 6-minute segment. And that's what worked for club tracks in those days. Chic was enormously popular for about 2 years, and then they weren't. But when they were, they were. Le Freak, a great song with a dance that nobody did. The dance basically didn't exist, but the song, not only did it exist, you could make the argument that Le Freak was the biggest hit in the history of disco. It was the biggest disco record by anybody. The song was enormously popular. From 1978, this is Le Freak by Chic. Now, as big as Le Freak was, and Le Freak was huge, 6 months later, Chic released another record called Good Times that also made it to number one. And I highly recommend Good Times as great listening in the car with the windows down this time of year. But Good Times was extra important because of its bass line. Its bass line would be stolen, borrowed, imitated, used as inspiration for a wide number of disco and post-disco records that happened in the early 1980s. It would be utilized over and over again by different artists. And sometimes they would give credit and sometimes not, because sometimes it was a direct copy and sometimes not. But the bass line in Good Times by Chic, as great a song as Good Times is, it's the bass line I really want you to focus in on, because that's the thing that set this record apart, and quite frankly, marks this record as a departure point for the foundation of a great number of songs in pop music that would come along after this, both in pop and in rhythm and blues. Good Times, 1979. This is Chic. I probably just broke a copyright law there too. Roll down the windows. I'm serious. It's a great song. Good Times. Chic, 79. Bernard Edwards and Nile Rodgers would go on to produce other artists. Most famously, perhaps, or the most famous artists that they produced, Diana Ross and David Bowie. They produced albums for both of them that were kind of comeback vehicles. Neither one of them had ever really gone away, but they hadn't had a big hit in a couple of years. And boy, oh boy, when Edwards and Rodgers got a hold, they sure did. Diana Ross had Upside Down. Let's listen to that. It became the biggest solo hit of Diana Ross's career in 1980, produced by Bernard Edwards and Nile Rodgers of Chic. Great song. David Bowie, a couple years later, his comeback vehicle, an album and tune called Let's Dance. Nile Rodgers was at the helm. Great stuff. Let's Dance, David Bowie, produced by Nile Rodgers of Chic. Okay, now we are up to the record that stands as the first official rap record to hit the top 40. There were other records before this that included a rap or a portion of speaking that could be misconstrued as rap that hit the top 40. But Rapper's Delight by the Sugar Hill Gang stands as the first fully rap record to make it to the top 40. Now, if you know Rapper's Delight, you know that it has absolutely nothing in common with the rap music that would come to characterize the mid and late 80s, the Tupac and Biggie movements. Rapper's Delight by Sugar Hill Gang was not part of that. Rapper's Delight by Sugar Hill Gang was pretty much a pop record that happened to be spoken and happened to have a driving beat underneath it that helped propel the lyrics and the lyricist. The driving beat underneath it was, in fact, the bass line of Good Times by Chic. So much so, it wasn't just a copy or it wasn't an imitation or an inspiration, it was the bass line. So much so that Bernard Edwards and Nile Rodgers wound up getting songwriting credit on Rapper's Delight. Rapper's Delight, Sugar Hill Gang, first full rap tune to hit the top 40. Give it its due. Rapper's Delight, Sugar Hill Gang. Okay, there were lots of artists, like I mentioned before, who wound up making disco records who did not traditionally make disco records. And in many instances, that didn't work out. They wound up, frankly, producing a lot of crap. The great thing, though, about Queen, this is the band that produced Bohemian Rhapsody. And they also produced songs like You're My Best Friend and Somebody to Love. Great, sort of straight up rock and roll kinds of ballads. They produced Bicycle Race, a rather interesting little top 40 ditty that was a great combination almost of it was rock and roll to be sure, but it was a little bit of a novelty tune there too. They produced Crazy Little Thing Called Love, which great rock song with a nice sort of rockabilly behind it. In 1980, Queen created a song called Another One Bites the Dust. And it caught on. It wasn't going to be released as a single from their album. It was on the same album as Crazy Little Thing Called Love. It wasn't going to be released as a single, but it caught on in clubs in London and New York and caught on big time, so much so that it sort of bled over into radio. And Another One Bites the Dust went to number one, and at the time was the biggest hit of Queen's career. Had Bohemian Rhapsody not been re-released in the States, Another One Bites the Dust would still be the biggest hit Queen ever had in America. As a result, it's second to Bohemian Rhapsody, and it has a bass line that is not Good Times by Chic, but is there a similarity? Is there some inspiration? Stands up on its own. Queen, Another One Bites the Dust.